boxing for MMA and kickboxing is completely different than just regular boxing. Take boxing with MMA and or kickboxing. One of the biggest moves in boxing defensively is slip, which is simply just to move your head completely out of the way of where it is. It's just a natural reaction when somebody throws something at us to move out of the way without giving up our height, without doing that with our waist, doing it by kind of moving our head to this angle outside of the body and breaking down our knees, this upside down V. We create an art by moving laterally and even moving inwards with this angle of making the opponent miss and then subsequently getting angles on him. So the second we do that in kickboxing or MMA, a good MMA fighter is going to fake, miss, or land a hook simply to throw a head kick. And head kick knockouts, look at Kamar Usman versus Leon Edwards. That's just a classic move. TJ Dillashaw did it many times. Many pro MMA fighters do it, to where you throw the hook and a second afterward, I would kick the camera over if I did it, but a head kick comes. And it's actually, if you throw a punch, that round kick is loaded right after there, especially on the lead side, because you're transferring all your weight to your back foot. So the second after the kick lands, boom. After the punch lands, a kick lands. So then this whole art of slipping, head movement, head feints, pulls and slips becomes obsolete. If you're a Muay Thai fighter or an MMA fighter, they might look a little stiff to you. If you're coming from a boxing background, you're like, why don't they have head motion? Because they're gonna get kicked in the head if they do. They don't wanna give up their height. They'd rather drop down and go for a takedown or pull back out of the way of a head kick or simply block it, rather than try to slip out of the way of even punches. MMA fighters and Muay Thai fighters train themselves not to even slip punches, to block them instead, so that they don't wind up eating head kicks. So that's one of the key differences. Rotation as well. If you go to any good school, Freddie Roach, for instance, what will they teach you? Load up all your weight on your front foot and move your entire body back 135 degrees so that you're actually totally rotated on the counter. You don't want to do that in arts where people routinely train how to leg kick, because leg kicks are easy to master, easy to knock people out with. And if you throw the classic boxing hook where you're all turned away like this, literally looking behind you, by the time you're done, you're open to head kicks, you're open to being kicked in the butt, literally kicked in the back of the leg. You're just too bladed, you're too turned. So this kind of modified boxing for MMA, we don't quite have the power, but we're not exposed to the head kick or leg kicks, which by definition we're completely exposed to in this bladed perfect boxing stance. It's just, I always say, you can do all this fancy stuff. You can easily check leg kicks coming from this direction, but coming from this direction, which is where they usually come, you have to be like Benny the Jet Urquidez. You have to be really talented to successfully, continuously check hard leg kicks the opponent is throwing in without kind of having the shoulders in this somewhat forward 45-degree angle, as opposed to this super bladed boxing stance, which, your center isn't exposed. In fact, very little is exposed, but very little is loaded up power-wise. Maybe you have a jab loaded up or a slip jab, but you don't really have access to your right hand. Your left hook isn't loaded up at all because you need to cock your rear shoulder forward in order to load your left hook, and it basically is cocked forward out of like a kickboxing or MMA stance. So all you have to do in an MMA or kickboxing stance in order to land a left hook is either step in or push down off the rear foot. That's it. It's easy. Whereas out of this traditional boxing stance, you almost need to pivot off the rear foot, set up that right hand before breaking down again and throwing that left hook. So much more complicated, actually, the science of boxing, just pure boxing. When you take kicks and takedowns out of it, it's a lot more complicated. It's a lot more difficult. There's a lot more, which is ironic, but that's just the way it is. Adding kicks and takedowns simplifies and reduces the amount of spaces you can successfully move to. Whereas if we take those out of the equation, if it's just boxing for boxing's sake, We can slip and dip all over the place and talk about different angles and dimensions that, we don't really get with kickboxing. So in boxing as well, you have what's called the peekaboo style. It's not like your long Russian guard, your bladed style, just the traditional stance that they'll teach you at any boxing school in the world. It's much more aggressive. The rear shoulder is not like it is in the traditional stance. It's just right behind the front shoulder. You're almost totally squared up, but your feet are still, one in front of the other. However, they're no longer on a tightrope. Your feet are now super wide. If you can see my feet right now, they're this wide, as opposed to the perfect boxing stance, my feet are this wide. There's a piece of tape, there's a 1/2 inch piece of tape in between my 2 feet at most. But turn that into the peekaboo stance. Not only do we widen our shoulders, our feet are wide too. It's still a long lunge, but now there's a lot of space between our feet. You might say, hey, your midsection and your center line is exposed. Well, it depends. What if I'm ducking under a punch? Now I've got the opponent totally exposed, and look, my feet are right underneath the shoulders. There's a great amount of width between them, but there's a great amount of stability too. It's like I'm standing on a circle, no longer standing on a tightrope and balancing. I've got much better balance with the legs wider. So if I can move into that wide foot stance at a point where I have the opponent exposed, then it makes for an excellent power punching stance and setup. So out of this high turtle guard Tyson stance, we have our elbows in. We can't accomplish this with the elbows out. This is not Muay Thai. We've got our elbows tight to the body and our front hand, actually both hands, because if you look at the perfect boxing stance, the rear hand is always touching right here. The front hand it's nebulous where it is. It can be in a range of different places depending on what your style is, but not in the peekaboo stance. Both hands are guarding the temples, and look at the chin, the number one target. It's taken away. You don't have it anymore because the shoulders are lifting up from the inner core. So we're totally hidden now. What do you have? You can try to hit here, but this is one of the hardest points you can hit. Probably gonna hurt yourself more than me if you hit yourself here. Maybe if you're like Mike Tyson or something, but most people will shatter their hand if they hit the exposed parts of the head now. You see how this front hand is slightly higher? Boom, look at that. It's just like momentum. It's like rolling down a hill. The way that power jab is unloading. And as it's unloading, it's like this is one arm. It feels like one sweater. It doesn't feel like, it feels like an arm and a body. This whole thing is like one covering, like a sweater, like a sheath. So I actually did it from the wrong position there, but that's the right position. That's the wrong position. That's the defensive, perfect boxing stance, rhythm boxing, Russian boxing stance position. And occasionally you reset up here. Peekaboo, you just hang out up here behind this cage. And yeah, there is openings to the body, both by virtue of the fact that you're forward like this in order to load up those power punches. But you also have openings and in either style, in either way. But just in terms of pure access to power punches, you can't argue that peekaboo. This is the destructive power stance. So coming here, right cross goes straight out, left power jab rolls downward, kind of like maybe a 5-degree angle. And the hook, this is just the butt and the rear foot pushing down as the front foot and hip twists. There's two versions. One is we twist on the front foot and push off the rear foot. One is flat front foot and twist on the rear foot. Those are the two different versions of the hook. Master both of them. They're both useful at different times. A great way to think about it, great coach Andy Nance used to always say, is think about it as throwing a power punch that way. So you're not hooking around, you're just kind of throwing straight. And this kind of, actually the defensive collapsing hook is the most powerful punch in boxing. If you can really catch somebody coming in like that, it's more powerful than the Tyson hook because of the physical leverage and the contact happening. So yeah, master just the basics, like I always say, the 2 straight punches, 2 uppercuts, and 2 hooks. If we can do that combination, straight, uppercut, uppercut, hook, hook, over and over again, then we can master some great basics. And of course, we can add to that. We can start to slip with some of the punches. We can start to throw different variations of these punches, even elbows. But the important thing is master those 2 basics. The straight arm punch, which is not completely straight, it's locked out a little bit. Like, it's not totally straight. There is the muscles learn and adapt to kind of create this 5-degree angle bent bar, which is pretty solid and prevents when you first start boxing, you hyperextend your elbow, you don't get it. But then after a few years, you learn to just lock it out, just like a micro bit, so you don't ever hyperextend your elbow again. And then you can really, all you do is lift your elbow and you start to get the whole body behind it without muscular force, just with the movement of your feet and butt. Next is the uppercut. Boom. See that the hands are twisting, but just because the core is moving, the shoulders are moving, but I'm not moving the shoulders. That would make me tired. This is giving me energy because I'm doing this bounce step with my butt and the balls of my feet. That's all I'm feeling now. I'm even kind of, I know it sounds weird. It's almost like melting the feeling between my hips and everything else. Like I'm trying to keep my structure, but I'm trying not to be tight, if that makes any sense. So we got the uppercuts. Make this little circle with the rear one, right where they're punching at the chin. It's gonna be replaced by the shoulder. A little circle with the rear uppercut. With the front uppercut, our weight is already loaded for that. I'm gonna go from this position. See that? Front shoulder becomes the rear shoulder becomes the front shoulder. So we put them together. So we got 4 punches now. Add the hook. Just step in or push off with the rear foot. And remember, other hand goes up. This all should feel like one arm. It shouldn't feel like 2 arms and you're doing this with one arm and this with the other. It should all have the feeling like it's one arm. So put it all together. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And just master those basics. Those basic punches, some head movement, some rolls, some ducks, some slips. Most importantly, keeping a super wide yoga ball feeling between your feet. I know this is weird, but both in terms of sitting your sits bones down for powers and kicking your butt outward a little bit so you're not standing up straight like this, you're pitched forward a little bit, and the feet just never ever coming together. It takes a lot of like just really simple, stupid, basic training to get there, but you'll get to it after a certain while. It's a very subtle difference that differentiates advanced practitioners from intermediate ones. And you can see that when you're advanced, when you're intermediate, all you're seeing is the belly button up. All you're seeing is these hands going fast. But when you're advanced, you see whether the person has their feet under them and whether they're moving correctly and whether they know how to rhythm and always be on balance and step back with the rear foot instead of sliding in the front foot and being off balance. And that's the difference between getting knocked down and not getting knocked down in a fight. It's just like wrestling. It's no different. If you're not in a perfect stance, you can't sprawl, you can't shoot. You've got to be in perfect stance and perfect position all the time. So just some stuff to think about. The basics, of course, where's it all coming from? The butt and the quads. This gluteal stance, this bend that we have, kind of like the same in wrestling. This athletic stance, which is 6 inches to a foot below our normal, kind of like we're standing at work, happy stance. Now this is 1 foot's in front of the other, shoulders are draped forward, hands are up and strong but relaxed at the same time. So we can throw out these combinations. stay in this precise positions, but without muscular force. The same way, it's almost like a dance. Like there's, you know, you're gonna look stupid if you're dancing from your shoulders, but if you're dancing from your hips, it looks cool, it makes sense, and it's just kind of how you should do it. In martial arts, it's not nebulous like that. It's very much how you will have power not to be pulled down in any direction, moving from the core, moving from the center, having your knees bent, having your legs under you, moving from the calves, quadriceps, hamstrings, and quads, and glutes. So important. I wanted to say lower back too. They call that the gluteal chain, the lower back, but really most important, focus on the glutes and the quads and the hamstrings. And just having the motion come from there, and you'll feel the weight start to kind of drop into this center where you can throw these power punches from and relax the upper body, and you're going to find incredible wind that you didn't know you had.